You are listening to the Keenan Vision podcast, produced by Salesforce Devops.net. This is episode 11, broadcast Friday, September 22nd, 2022. Vern's report on Dreamforce 2022. Let's commit. Hey everybody, it's Vern here, coming off of Dreamforce 2022. And I wanted to do my recap overview for you about how I felt about the show and the experience and how it relates to Salesforce DevOps especially, of course. And so let's just kind of dive right into it. I got some notes here. So let's talk about the top line, which I think is that this Dreamforce is a bright light in maybe some dark economic times that could be around us soon. But this was a successful conference, definitely on the face of it. We had the streets of San Francisco were alive for only the second time since the Warriors parade that we had earlier this year. So it was two events in San Francisco, lit up the city, and this, I'm sure, brought in even more money. So it was great to have that. There was some energy about that, some people getting back together. I think the Golden Hoodie crowd, the MVPs, and people who really thrive on these experiences of sharing and talking to everybody were there in force, showing off their love for Salesforce quite a bit, and I think I'll talk a little bit more about that because as a journalist, you always kind of want to, when people are acting too enthusiastic, you kind of wonder why are they doing that, and so I'm going to look at that a little bit, and I think the vendor ecosystem was particularly strong, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And this new product was kind of whatever, the Genie thing. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And it didn't really they didn't choose to use it to overwhelm everybody with it. So I think it was actually a little better paced introduction than some of their earlier buzzword-oriented introductions. So I think Salesforce Marketing handled the show excellently and positioned it wonderfully. So let me talk a little bit about Genie. Here, the opening keynote, of course, was just as silly as ever. There were less dancing characters, actually. What happened instead was when they introduced Genie, it was a hologram on video. So Brett Taylor was standing in the center there, and he had the Genie thing pop out of the stage. We couldn't see it in person, but you could see it on the screen. That was the hologram, and they showed it later. You've probably seen it. So the thing that was interesting also is that Brett Taylor is taking more of a center stage for these type of announcements. There was a CNBC story out there with an interview of him where it was positioned as this is his move. The Genie thing is his move to advance the company going forward. So that was interesting. It wasn't so much the Benioff show, maybe, as in some other years, although everything about the show is Benioff. I mean, I'll just talk about that for a second. I mean, there are two waterfalls. You walk in, you hear the jungle sounds. You have Jane Goodall. You got, the Hawaiian greeting, blessing. You got everything about this tech conference is different, of course. That it's laid out in the streets of San Francisco and the convention center area is different. They close the streets. You got all the convention centers and other venues to use to do the conference. So as a unique tech experience, they definitely pulled that off. So even though I'm saying Benioff was not quite as front and center in the product introductions this year, he was definitely front and center spiritually for the entire conference. So let's get back to the Genie introduction. Yes, it's a repackaging of an existing product called Salesforce CDP, which originally was Datorama, which I guess came from an Israeli company. It was an acquisition a number of years ago. So the thing that is different about it, it's not just a repackaging, is that there are adapters now to every cloud. So there's a Genie for Sales Cloud, Genie for Marketing Cloud, Genie for this, that, and the other cloud. There's Genie for Slack, which was interesting, I guess. And so I think this move had to be done on Salesforce's part because they're being talked about as being not part of the intelligent data layer. So that's the part where you take all the masses of data that is accumulating in an enterprise and actually use it to focus in on a customer, every aspect from service to support to sales to marketing, and to get it in there. So they had just done CDP was tied in just to marketing, so they had to broaden it to the entire cloud. So they had to make this move because they were starting to be seen as not competitive with Snowflake, Fivetran, and Databricks are the examples that I use. So this move is strong because Salesforce is the number one application delivery platform in the world today. Great achievement. They've just eclipsed SAP, so it's like they're neck and neck in terms of the amount of revenue that the companies are making every quarter. This is, like so I said before, Salesforce is not a growth company anymore because they're not in the intelligent data layer. That's a scuttlebutt. So on Investor Day on September 21st, where they're talking to the investor press, Brett Taylor went on CNBC and said, look around you. Salesforce is a growth company using Dreamforce and this Genie thing as a explanation for why Salesforce is still a growth company. So we shall see. And because they say we shall see, because Salesforce, this move just makes them a slightly better competitor in the industry, but they have a very strong platform from which they shall grow. So it has to pay off. They have to be able to take a somewhat weak platform and distribute it and then make it better eventually. So I see in the long run an acquisition could be in the works for this. The next thing is best sessions. I think I heard, I didn't have a chance to go to either one of these, but I heard great things about Pablo Gonzalez from Salto and Rob Cowell from Gearset, that they had overflow sessions and they were very well received. So congratulations to those guys. The two sessions I wanted to call out was how Google does DevOps that one was very interesting. It was a very opinionated and kind of an important session where they talked about some of the limitations of Salesforce DevOps and of Salesforce and how they dealt with it. So that was very interesting. And two things that came out of that, or a few things that came out of that, was their use of environment variables and their use of feature flags and how they implemented those in kind of like an open source way. So I was going to follow up with with Mitch Spano from Google and try to get that on the podcast and other introductions on the video. Okay, so I went to another session. It was sparsely attended, but I found it fascinating. And there's, for both of these sessions I'm talking about here, there's a live stream on my Twitter, so you can get the slides and some videos that I recorded from those sessions. The one I'm talking about is the one that explained how they do DevOps at Salesforce. So, as you know, Salesforce is a giant collection of microservices, it turns out. They have tens of thousands of them running all at once. So it's an amazing global scale DevOps challenge that these guys are dealing with. So I found it fascinating to learn more about it. The one thing that I'm going to probably talk a little bit more about is the Genie, or not the Genie, but the Einstein team over at Salesforce has produced an open source Python library called Merlion or something like that. that does time series analysis and ML machine learning of the time series data, and will do predictive analysis of anomalies. So it's an AI layer that they can put over this massive observability challenge that they're always dealing with. So I think moving on to the show floors and the ancillary services market, I think here's one thing I definitely want to comment on is that Salesforce did not release any nuclear bombs on the VARs this year, on the value-added resellers, like they did with last year. They made an announcement about having a backup service now built into Salesforce, and that's great news for Own Backup and other people who participate in Salesforce and are big parts of Dreamforce. So they didn't. They took care not to stomp on any of the vendors this time, which I think is very smart. The vendor villages were busy. I think everybody had their representation with a standard sized show floor booth. Some of them had double sized booths. None of the vendors that we track here at SalesforceDevops.net had any gigantic booths or any gigantic presence. They all had a presence, and the system integrators were the dominant presence at the show. If you're talking about vendors, so it's Deloitte and Accenture and Capgemini and all the rest. They were the ones who were also spending to have big big show floor areas, and were catering to the crowd. Which, by the way, turned out to be maybe 60-70% even vendors and Salesforce and all that kind of stuff. So I think there was an imbalance there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I wanted to call out I think I got 15 companies here that I track or I met that I wanted to make sure I mentioned were at the show. And I got to visit some of them. I didn't get to visit all of you, so I apologize for that. And I love you all, so keep up the good work. So we got ExcelQ, Cloud Compliance. AutoRabbit was there under the CodeScan brand. They had an announcement before the show. Capato was there. They also had an announcement of their fall release before the show. Both of those are covered on the website. Elements Cloud was there. Flowsum was there. Gearset, Metazoa, Odaceva, Opsera. Opsera actually released a free trial version of their product at the show, so you should look that up. Own Backup was there. Prodly was there. They announced a DevOps Center integration, which is interesting. That extends their platform from just working on ancillary metadata to working on all forms of metadata. Well, not all of them, as you know, but every form of metadata that could be handled by DevOps Center. So that's good. Provar was there quite strongly. They had a number of sessions and a very active booth. Salto was there. I spent time hanging out at the Salto Lounge. They had a little extra space there, so that was nice. And I met with WithSecure for the first time, and they're getting added to the platform cybersecurity category because they're formerly F-Secure, kind of like a virus scanning company, but they have a service now where they'll scan all of your entry points, all the data that you're ingesting into Salesforce to make sure you don't have any, viruses or bad links or things like that in there. So they're getting added to the platform cybersecurity category and the Salesforce DevOps Met. So I think moving on to Salesforce DevOps Center, I think it was there. It had a presence. We had the two companies who have integrations, Elements Cloud and Prodly. We're certainly talking about it. And I think it's still at the early stages. So the current evaluation hasn't made much of a dent yet. So there's really no data or information on satisfaction or actual adoption rates, and that's actually to be expected because it's still technically in the beta phase. So it still kind of has my vaporware Eye of Sauron on it, if you know what I mean. So let's see how I definitely want to see this product out there and finished, and so I can give it a good evaluation and start talking to more people about it. So because everybody wants to know about it, and I think it's still kind of a question mark. So, but, do want to emphasize we got Proudly and Elements Cloud are making use of it. So, final bit here is kind of like the journalistic topics, or kind of like the cynical analyst topics about how I did the show. So, I did go to the press room, and the thing that's interesting, and I went to the press conference also that was held immediately after the keynote with Mark and Brett Taylor, Mark Benioff and Brett Taylor. That's a room with only about maybe 60 journalists in there, and the two of them sitting in the front. So I was like sitting one row, in front of them. So it was pretty much a close experience with those guys, and mainly the foreign press, which were numerous, which I found interesting. Were there to ask questions of Mark and Brett Taylor. The only interesting one was with somebody. There really wasn't any interesting one, so there was all a bunch of banner. But it was interesting to see how Mark was. He was whipped because he had just walked the whole show floor, and he was a little tired. I could understand that. So good job walking that show floor, Mark. It was big. It was long. So there was a press conference. Get to joke around with other, press people and do more cynical jokes. So in the press room, it was interesting because I was talking to this German press guy, and he was also at the press conference, and he was a little offended having, being from Germany and kind of very interested in how everything about this impacts SAP. That the CEO who had just surpassed SAP's revenue was wearing bunny ears during his keynote. So he was a little taken aback or a little offended by that. So I think is kind of reflecting his readership there a little bit. So it's interesting to see that. And I also got some information today, as a matter of fact, that Europe is strong in Salesforce. So I found that to be interesting. And let me see. So going on to the other things, let's talk about Trailblazers loving Salesforce. So they love to show this off, right? They have the Golden Hoodie Awards. They have the backstories. They have the Golden Hoodie section. They put it right next to the press section. And those people were loud and enthusiastic. And it was, and when, and I know many of them, Devops people and other community people and other folks like that. And I think the thing to not take for granted if you're a cynical journalist is that thing is real. So it is real. So the Trailblazers, sometimes they get an opportunity through Salesforce to improve their lives by literally, moving to a new apartment or getting a house, buying a car, getting a promotion, something like that. And it's because of Salesforce. And so, and that opportunity is there for people who normally don't get a chance in tech. So we're talking about female workers and people of different genders and people of different colors, basically. So white guys like me aren't quite as dominant in the Salesforce ecosystem as they are in other tech ecosystems. So it's true. And those opportunities are there. Not everybody's successful. There are stories about people who try and fail, and they're very disappointed because they couldn't find the community. But the community is there. And especially if you go out and look at the the Trailblazer or the Trailblazer community conferences such as Tahoe Dreamin', Southeast Dreamin', all the Dreamin'. So those, if you don't like Dreamforce, and that's another thing, I did talk to several attendees for customers. I kind of like directly sought them out because I wanted to talk to find some customers, and most of them were kind of overwhelmed by the entire experience. A lot of them can't sync up to what's being said on stage as to how they're going to be able to use it back home. That's something. And I think another thing is just the sheer amount of selling combined with the need to kind of like make it a hike to go between the different venues. And sometimes it's confusing because of the names that they choose for all of the different venues for where you need to go. So a lot of people were disappointed that they were standing in lines, or they missed the keynote, or they didn't understand where to go. So I saw some of that, and those people, I tried to make them feel better by encouraging them to find a Dreaming conference near them and to not give up. And that's definitely my message, is that, just to wrap up here, Salesforce ecosystem is booming. I just had some critiques in there, but let me get it straight that the ecosystem is definitely booming. It's a bright spot in what is apparently a darkening economic horizon. Macro effects are sure to come in, so we don't know exactly what the future is for the ecosystem, because there could be macro effects that affect all of us. So I think we're still in a realm of uncertainty, and analysts who say they know what they are talking about, even on quarterly or half-year predictions, are probably not well-founded in actual prescience. They don't know what they're talking about. Because I could make a prediction, but I don't have a very high confidence in it right now. So I'm just kind of like hanging on for every monthly and quarterly reports right now to see how the SaaS ecosystem is going to weather the economic storm. Right now, if you're in the Salesforce bubble, it's strong. It's booming. You should take advantage of that if you're trying to develop a company or get a job or advance your career. So that's my report for Salesforce Dreamforce 2022. Thank you for watching. My name is Vernon Keenan from SalesforceDevops.net, and I'll see you the next time. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Keenan Vision podcast. Please come visit the SalesforceDevops.net website and sign up for email notifications of significant updates. Thanks to 10 Ton Chicken for the music, which is available on iTunes. And also be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review about how well we did on this podcast.